General Harlan Voss pressed the barrel of his pistol against the kneeling soldier's forehead and pulled the trigger without blinking. Then he stepped over the body, straightened his uniform, and turned to the man trembling behind the desk. "Ghost Unit 7 never existed," he said, his voice perfectly calm. "Every name on that list is already dead. Anyone who survived the ambush, you find them and you finish the job. No files, no graves, no witnesses." He signed the order. He walked out. 22 years later, in a trauma bay in Norfolk, Virginia, one name on that list was still breathing, and she just made a military canine stand down with 3 words. Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The radio call came in at 2:09 in the morning, and charge nurse Patricia Holloway had already been awake for 11 hours. She set her coffee down the second the dispatcher's voice crackled over the overhead speaker, and something in her stomach dropped before the man even finished the sentence. "Trauma incoming, military, GSW, multiple sites, ETA 4 minutes. And Holloway, they're saying there's a dog. A military canine. It's still with the patient. Unit won't authorize removal." Patricia stood very still for exactly 2 seconds. Then she moved. She pushed through the double doors into the trauma bay, clapping her hands twice to get attention, her voice cutting through the background hum of monitors and rolling carts. "Listen up, we've got a SEAL coming in, gunshot wounds, unknown number of sites. There is a military canine attached to this patient, and I do not, I repeat, do not want anyone approaching that animal without clearance. Somebody get me Dr. Kessler. Somebody else get me a trauma cart. And where is my rookie?" A hand went up near the supply closet. Ava Cole. She was 29 years old, although most people who looked at her eyes thought she was older. She had dark hair pulled back tight, hands that never seemed to shake, and a quality that was difficult to name but easy to feel. A stillness. The kind that doesn't come from being calm. The kind that comes from having already survived the worst thing that can happen to a person. "Right here," Ava said. "You're with me," Patricia said. "Stay back, stay quiet, and do exactly what I tell you." Understood. The ambulance bay doors blew open at 2:14, and the stretcher came through fast. 2 paramedics, 1 military escort in full combat dress, and a dog. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, roughly 80 pounds of muscle in training, and it was running alongside the stretcher with its head level, its eyes forward, its entire body radiating a single message: "Touch him, and I will end you." The man on the stretcher was Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes, 36 years old, and he was losing blood at a rate that made Dr. Marcus Kessler's jaw tighten the moment he stepped close enough to see. There were 2 entry wounds visible, one in the left shoulder, one low on the right side, and Reyes was conscious, which was almost worse than if he hadn't been, because the noise he was making was quiet and controlled. And that kind of quiet from a man in that much pain meant he was trained not to scream, which meant the pain was beyond what most people could have imagined. "Sir, we need to get to you right now," Kessler said, stepping forward. The dog turned its head. One low sound came from its throat. Not a bark, deeper than a bark. A warning. Kessler stopped. "Okay," he said carefully, raising both hands. "Okay." The military escort, a young corporal named Tate, who looked like he hadn't slept in 30 hours, stepped to the side and spoke in a rapid, hushed tone to Patricia. "The dog's name is Kodak. He's been assigned to Reyes for 3 years. We cannot remove him by force without risking serious injury to your staff. His handler authorization code was compromised during the operation. We don't have the current deactivation sequence. We've got someone trying to reach the unit commander, but we haven't been able to." "You don't have the code," Patricia repeated. "No, ma'am." "So what exactly are you suggesting I do?" Corporal Tate opened his mouth and closed it again. He genuinely did not have an answer. Kessler tried again, moving at an angle this time, attempting to circle toward the stretcher from the left side. Kodak's head swung. The growl dropped an octave. Two nurses behind Kessler took a visible step backward. One of them was already reaching for her radio to call hospital security, and Patricia could see from across the room that this situation was 30 seconds away from becoming something that could not be undone. She turned to find Ava. Ava was already watching the dog, not the way the other nurses were watching it, wide-eyed, one foot angled toward the exit. Ava was watching Kodak the way someone watches a person they used to know, reading something in the posture, the set of the ears, the specific angle of the head. Her eyes moved from the dog to the man on the stretcher and back again, and something shifted in her expression so quickly that Patricia almost missed it. A flicker, gone in less than a second. "Cole," Patricia said quietly, "talk to me." "He's not in attack mode," Ava said. Her voice was level. "He's in guard mode. There's a difference. If he was going to bite someone, he would have done it already. He's waiting to be told it's safe." "And how do you know that?" Ava didn't answer that question. She was already walking forward. "Ava," Patricia said, and there was a warning in it. "I've got it," Ava said. She moved through the cluster of frozen nurses and aides, and one extremely tense security officer who had his hand on his radio and was 30 seconds from making a decision nobody in this room was going to like. She walked without hesitation, without the kind of slow, hands-up body language that most people use around a dog they're afraid of. She walked like she belonged there, like she had done this before. She stopped about 4 feet from the stretcher. Kodak's eyes locked onto her. The growl was still low in his chest, not directed at her exactly, but present, filling the air between them. His body was still positioned between the medical team and Reyes, and every muscle in that animal was spring-loaded. Ava crouched down, slowly, deliberately, the way you lower yourself when you want the other person to know you're not a threat. She was eye level with the dog now. She looked at him directly, not aggressively, not fearfully, just clearly. And then she spoke. What she said was quiet, so quiet that the people closest to her could only catch fragments, a sequence of sounds that weren't quite English, not quite a command in any language they recognized, a rhythm more than words, clipped and precise, and carrying some frequency that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and land somewhere deeper. Kodak stopped growling. The room, and this is not an exaggeration, went completely silent. The dog's body changed, not relaxed entirely, but shifted. The hard angles softened by maybe 10%. His ears moved. He blinked, and then slowly he lowered his head by about 2 inches, which in the language of a military working dog means something very specific. It means acknowledged. It means stand down. He stepped to the side, not away from the stretcher. He didn't abandon his post, but he moved to the right, creating a space, and he sat, and he watched, and he did not make another sound. For 2 full seconds, nobody in that trauma bay moved. Then Kessler's training kicked back in, and he said sharply, "Let's go, people, move!" And the team surged forward, and the work began. Ava stood. She stepped back. She took her place at the peripheral of the team, doing exactly what a rookie nurse should be doing, handing instruments, managing vitals monitors, staying out of the way of the surgeons, and her face was composed and professional and completely unremarkable. But Patricia Holloway was watching her, and Patricia Holloway had been a trauma nurse for 27 years, and she knew how to read people in a crisis. And what she had just watched did not fit inside any frame she had for a 29-year-old nurse who had been on the floor for 7 months. Reyes was stabilized 22 minutes later, not saved. That would take surgery and time and blood and luck, but stabilized enough to move, breathing on his own, vitals coming up. When they wheeled him toward the surgical suite, Kodak stood and followed the stretcher without being told. And when the doors opened and the nurses began to guide the dog gently but firmly toward the waiting area, Kodak looked back once, back at Ava, and then went without resistance. Dr. Kessler pulled off his gloves and stood very still in the center of the trauma bay, which was now empty except for the two of them. He looked at Ava. She was wiping down a supply cart with the focused efficiency of someone who simply wanted to return to normal. "Cole," he said. She looked up. "What did you say to that dog?" She held his gaze for a moment. "Something that worked." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He stared at her. "Where does a nurse learn a military K9 stand-down code?" "They don't," she said simply, and she went back to wiping down the cart. Kessler stood there for another moment, his mind working through something it couldn't quite assemble. Then he walked away because he had a patient in surgery, and whatever Ava Cole was carrying, it was going to have to wait. Patricia found Ava in the supply room at 2:53 in the morning. Ava was restocking bandage wraps with the methodical patience of someone who doesn't mind silence. Patricia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and watched her for a moment. "7 months, Patricia said. Ava didn't look up. 7 months. You've been here 7 months. Before that, I've got a resume that shows 2 years at a clinic in Charlottesville, 1 year at a rural hospital in Western Virginia, and a nursing certification from a program in Richmond." Patricia paused. "I've worked in this ER for 27 years. I've seen nurses who were former EMTs, former military medics, former firefighters. None of them have ever made a combat-trained K9 stand down with a whisper." Ava set down the bandage roll she was holding. She turned to face Patricia. Her expression was not defensive. It was careful, in the way a person is careful when they have spent a very long time measuring exactly what they say and to whom. "I've had some experience with working dogs," she said. "Some experience," Patricia repeated, and her voice made clear what she thought of that answer. "Ava, that dog was in full threat response. Trained military canines in that state have put grown men in the hospital. You walked up to him like you were greeting an old friend." Ava said nothing. "In the code, whatever you said, Corporal Tate looked like he was going to pass out. He pulled me aside after and told me that what you used was a Tier 2 authentication sequence. He said those codes are classified above his clearance level. He said there's maybe 30 people alive who know them." The supply room was very quiet. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Patricia said, and her voice was gentler now, not accusatory, genuinely asking, one woman to another, the way you ask someone when you already suspect the answer is something enormous. "Who are you, Ava?" Ava looked at her for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and entirely honest in the way people are honest when they choose a truth that doesn't explain anything. "I'm a nurse," she said, "and right now I'm going to go check on my patients." She walked past Patricia and out into the hall, and Patricia turned and watched her go. And the thing that stayed with her, that would stay with her for a long time after, was not the mystery of what Ava knew or where she learned it. It was the way Ava moved. The specific quality of someone who has spent years learning to be invisible. Someone who has practiced, deeply and deliberately, the art of being unremarkable. Patricia had seen that quality once before, in a man who had later been described in a classified briefing she was not supposed to have heard as a member of a unit that had been officially disbanded and whose records had been expunged. A unit that had operated in theater during the Gulf War, in places and in ways that the government had no intention of ever acknowledging. She hadn't thought about that in 20 years. She thought about it now. At 3:47 in the morning, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes was in surgery, and the surgical team was working with the focus and silence of people who have done this before and intend to do it successfully. The anesthesiologist was monitoring vitals. The surgical resident was assisting. And in the hallway outside, Corporal Tate was on his third attempt to reach his chain of command and getting nothing but voicemail and a growing sense of dread. He finally reached someone at 4:03. He could hear the shift in the voice on the other end before the person even spoke. A particular kind of attention, sudden and sharp. The kind that means the information you've just delivered has traveled somewhere fast. Say that again, the voice said. Tate said it again. The name, the code, the description of what had happened in the trauma bay. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Tate checked his phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Don't let her leave," the voice said finally. "Sir?" "The nurse. Do not let her leave that building. Do you understand me?" Tate looked through the window of the ER waiting room, where he could see the back of a dark-haired nurse moving between patient bays, doing her job with the quiet efficiency she always seemed to have. He felt something cold settle in his chest that he couldn't name. "Yes, sir," he said. "I understand." But even as he said it, some part of him, some instinct that you develop when you've been in the field long enough, told him that if Ava Cole decided to leave, there was not one thing he or anyone else in this building was going to do to stop her. Reyes came out of surgery at 5:20. The surgeon said the words that meant he was going to live, and the team exhaled collectively, and somewhere in the hospital a military working dog lifted his head and put it back down and sighed once, deeply, as if he had known already and was simply waiting for the humans to catch up. Ava heard the news at the nurse's station. She nodded, made a note in a chart, and went to get more coffee. And in a room she didn't know about, in a building 2 miles away, a phone rang. A man answered it. He listened without speaking for 45 seconds. When the voice on the other end finished, the man, whose name was Commander Joel Ashford, and who had not slept properly in 3 days, and who carried in his wallet a photograph that was 22 years old, said only 4 words. "Get me a helicopter." He said it the way people say things when the thing they have been waiting for, dreading, hoping for, searching for, has finally, after all this time, happened. 4 words. And somewhere under the pre-dawn sky of Norfolk, Virginia, a woman who was supposed to be dead poured herself a cup of coffee, looked out a window at the darkness, and felt, without knowing exactly why, that the world she had built here, the careful, quiet, ordinary world she had constructed piece by piece over 22 years, was about to end. She drank her coffee anyway, because some habits you keep, not because they save you, but because they remind you who you chose to be. And Ava Cole had made her choice a long time ago, in a place she never talked about, among people whose names she had memorized like prayers, most of whom were gone now. She had chosen to live. She had chosen this. She set down the cup, straightened her scrubs, and walked back toward the ward. Behind her, Kodak turned his head in her direction from across the waiting room, tracking her movement with the patient, unwavering focus of an animal who recognizes something in a person that the person no longer recognizes in themselves. The dog watched her until she disappeared through the double doors. Then he lowered his head to his paws and waited. 5:31 a.m. Commander Joel Ashford didn't wait for the helicopter to fully land before he pushed open the side door. The rotor wash hit him hard, but he walked through it without flinching, the way a man walks when he has been waiting 22 years for a moment and will not let something as minor as wind slow him down. His aide called after him twice. He didn't answer. He crossed the rooftop and pushed through the stairwell door, and the sound of the hospital swallowed him. The PA system, the distant beeping of monitors, the specific hum of a building full of people fighting to stay alive. He hadn't been inside a hospital since 2003. He'd made a point of it. Too many memories lived in places like this. Too many goodbyes said under fluorescent lights to people who deserve better. He reached the 3rd floor and found Corporal Tate exactly where he'd been told to expect him, standing outside the surgical recovery wing with the posture of someone who had been awake for too long and had just been told something that rearranged everything he thought he knew. Ashford didn't slow down. "Is she still here?" "Yes, sir. She's on shift until 7. "Anyone approach her?" "No, sir. You said not to." "Good." Ashford stopped. He turned to look at Tate directly, and something in his expression made the younger man stand straighter without meaning to. What exactly did she say to the dog? Tate hesitated. I couldn't hear it clearly, sir. It was quiet, a short sequence. But Kodak responded like she was his primary handler. Full stand down, no resistance. He just moved aside. Ashford was quiet for a moment. You know what stand down sequence that was? No, sir, my clearance doesn't. It's a Tier 2 ghost authentication code, Ashford said. It was issued once, to one unit, in 1991. He looked down the hallway, and that unit was declared dead in action on March 14th, 1992. Tate opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Sir, are you saying she's... I'm saying I need to talk to her, Ashford said, and started walking again. Alone. Patricia Holloway stepped in front of him before he made it 10 feet. She didn't do it dramatically. She simply appeared, the way nurses appear when something is happening on their floor that they haven't authorized. Suddenly, quietly, and with a certainty that stops people cold. She was a head shorter than Ashford and looked at him the way she looked at everyone who came onto her floor, with urgency and no badge she recognized. Commander, she said. She'd read the name off his uniform before he'd even opened his mouth. This is my floor. Whatever you need from one of my nurses, you can tell me first. Ashford looked at her. In another context, he would have appreciated her. Ma'am, this is a military matter. This is a hospital, Patricia said. That makes it my matter. What do you want with Ava Cole? Something moved across Ashford's face at the name. Brief, almost imperceptible. But Patricia caught it because Patricia caught everything. You know her, she said. It wasn't a question. I knew someone with her skills, Ashford said carefully, a long time ago. And what happened to that person? He held her gaze. She died. Patricia said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way she read everyone, looking for the thing beneath the thing, the real current running under the surface. What she found in Ashford's face was not hostility, it was something older and heavier. Grief, maybe. Or its close cousin, guilt. She stepped aside. Ava was at the nurse's station, entering chart notes with the focused efficiency she always had, when she felt it. Not heard, not saw, felt. The specific shift in the atmosphere of a room when someone walks into it who changes the air. She had learned to feel that in a different life, in a different body almost, and she had spent 22 years trying to unlearn it and had never entirely succeeded. She kept her eyes on the screen for exactly 3 more seconds. Then she looked up. Commander Joel Ashford was standing 15 feet away, and he was looking at her, and his face, the face of a man she had last seen on a tarmac in Saudi Arabia in the winter of 1991, was doing something she had never once seen it do in all the years she'd known him. It was breaking. Sparrow, he said, and his voice cracked on the word, just slightly, just enough. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Sparrow. Her unit name. The name she hadn't heard spoken aloud since the night she crawled out of a burning transport vehicle in the Kuwaiti desert and decided, in the space of one ragged breath, to stop being the person that name belonged to. She stood up slowly. Her hands were flat on the desk, steady, because she had trained herself to keep her hands steady. You have the wrong person, she said. No, Ashford said. I really don't. My name is Ava Cole. I'm a registered nurse. I don't know what. You used the Ghost 7 authentication sequence on a military K9 at 2:14 this morning. His voice was quiet, but absolute. There are exactly 4 people alive who know that code. I'm one of them. You're another. He paused. The other 2 are in federal custody. The nurse's station was not empty. 2 aides were within earshot. A resident was charting 10 feet away. Ava looked at them, then back at Ashford, and made a decision in the space of a blink. Break room, she said. Now. She walked ahead of him, not waiting, not looking back, moving with that particular quality Patricia had noticed. Deliberate, contained, someone who has decided how this conversation is going to go before it starts. Ashford followed. He had expected fear, or denial, or the kind of careful blankness that people wear when they're caught. He had not expected command. Even now, in scrubs, in a hospital break room, she walked like someone who had once been responsible for other people's lives and had never entirely set that weight down. She closed the door, turned to face him. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I didn't," he said. "You found yourself. The code, Ava, whatever you're calling yourself, using that code was like sending up a flare. I used it to save a man's life. I know that." He moved to the table but didn't sit. "Reyes is going to make it. The surgical team says—" "I heard." She crossed her arms. "What do you want, Joel?" He flinched at the name. Not the rank, the name. Because it meant she remembered who they were to each other before everything went wrong. "I want to know how you survived," he said. "The ambush, the vehicle. We searched for—" "You searched for a body," she said. "You weren't looking for someone walking." "Ava, don't." The word came out with an edge she hadn't intended, and she pulled it back, recalibrated, continued with more control. "I was the only one who got out. I crawled 3 miles to a civilian road. A Kuwaiti family found me. I was in a private clinic for 6 weeks before I could stand without help." Her voice was even, practiced. The voice of someone who has told themselves this story enough times that it has lost its capacity to destroy them, even if it never lost the weight. By the time I could have reached out to command, the official report had already been filed. Ghost 7 was dead. All of us. We didn't know. You signed the report, Joel. Her eyes were steady on his. I saw it. Years later, I found a copy. Your signature on the declaration of death, for all 7 of us. The silence between them was dense and specific, the kind of silence that carries history. "That report wasn't voluntary," he said finally. She waited. "Voss ordered it," Ashford said. "General Harlan Voss. He wanted Ghost 7 buried. The unit, the mission records, everything. He didn't want any investigation into what happened in that valley." His jaw was tight. "I signed because he was holding 3 people's careers and 2 people's lives over my head, and I was 29 years old, and I made the worst decision of my life." Something shifted in Ava's face. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. Recognition that the story she had been carrying was more complicated than the shape she'd given it. "Why are you here, Joel?" she asked again. "Really?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. He set it on the table between them. "Voss is dying," he said. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He's been approached by a journalist, a serious one, national publication, who has documentation about what happened in that valley, about the order that was given before the ambush, about why Ghost 7 was deployed to that location, and what Voss stood to gain from making sure nobody came back." Ava looked at the document but didn't touch it. "What order?" "The mission was a setup," Ashford said. "Your unit was sent to that location based on falsified intelligence. Voss had a private arrangement with a weapons contractor who needed certain documentation destroyed. Documentation that was being held at the target site. He needed people who could get in and get out without leaving a trail. He needed them to succeed." Ashford's voice dropped. "And then he needed them to not come home." The room was completely still. Ava's breathing didn't change. Her hands didn't move. But something behind her eyes went very, very quiet. The way things go quiet before a significant storm. Before something that has been building for a long time finally arrives. "He killed my unit," she said. "Yes." "On purpose?" "Yes." She looked at the document. "And now he's dying and someone's about to publish it." "The journalist wants a surviving witness," Ashford said. "I've spent the last 8 months telling her there were none. And then at 5 this morning, I got a call from a corporal in Norfolk who told me a rookie nurse spoke a classified military authentication code to a combat dog and... He stopped. His voice had roughened. He cleared his throat. And I drove 4 hours and then got on a helicopter because I needed to see it for myself. See what for yourself? That you were alive, he said, and this time the crack in his voice was undeniable. Ava, I've carried that report for 22 years. Your name on that list. All 7 of your names. I needed to... Don't, she said, but softer this time. Not anger, something more complicated. Don't make this about your guilt right now, Joel. There's something you're not telling me. What is it? He was quiet for 4 seconds. Voss knows about you. She went still. Not about this hospital, not about Norfolk specifically, but when the journalist's investigation started surfacing, he opened an inquiry. He has people looking, quietly. Officially, it's framed as a security audit, but he looked at her directly. If they find you, Ava, you become a loose end that Voss spent 22 years believing was tied off. And a man like Voss, even dying, does not leave loose ends. She stared at him. You came here to warn me. I came here because you deserve to know, he said. And because... He stopped himself. Because what? Because the journalist's case is strong, but it's not complete. She has documents. She has Voss's communications. She has a paper trail that gets close, but doesn't close the loop. What she doesn't have is a witness, Ava said. A survivor, he corrected. There's a difference. A witness saw something and can report it. A survivor lived it. A survivor changes the entire shape of what this story is. She turned away from him, faced the wall. For a long moment, she was simply a woman standing in a hospital break room at 6 in the morning, and there was nothing in her posture that said soldier, nothing that said survivor, nothing that said ghost. She was just a person holding something very heavy, deciding whether to keep holding it or set it down. My life is here, she said. This floor, these patients, this is what I built. I know. I'm not that person anymore. I know that too. He paused. But the people who sent your unit into that valley, they're still walking around. Voss is dying, but the contractor he worked with isn't. The officer who falsified the intelligence report got promoted twice after the Gulf War. He's a general now. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. Marcus Reyes and Danny Colton and Ray Webb and Eddie Park and Sandra Oh and Louis Trin walked into that valley because someone with power decided their lives were worth less than a business arrangement. They deserved to have someone say that out loud. The names hit her like physical things. Marcus, Danny, Ray, Eddie, Sandra, Louis, her people, her unit. 6 names she had whispered to herself on bad nights for 2 decades, the way people repeat prayers when they no longer believe in God, but still need the ritual of speaking the names of the lost. She turned around. Ashford saw something in her face that he recognized. He had seen it once before, in a desert, in the winter of 1991, right before the most complicated and effective military operation he had ever witnessed. It was the look of a person who has made a decision and is now simply calculating what comes next. You said Voss has people looking, she said. Yes. How close? Days, he said. Maybe less. She absorbed this. Does anyone else know you came here? My aide on the helicopter, that's it. And the journalist? She doesn't know about you yet. Ava nodded slowly. She picked up the document from the table, folded it once, and put it in her scrub pocket. I need to finish my shift, she said. Ashford blinked. I'm sorry? I have patience. I have 2 more hours on my shift. I'm not going to walk out and leave Patricia short-staffed because a man in a uniform showed up and complicated my morning. She moved toward the door. When I'm done, we'll talk. You'll wait. He stood there for a moment, slightly dazed by the absolute normalcy of it, by the fact that this woman, who had just been told her life might be in danger, and that the people who tried to kill her unit were still powerful and still moving in the world, had responded by saying she needed to finish her shift. "Ava," he said. She paused at the door. "Are you afraid?" She considered the question with genuine honesty. "I've been afraid every day for 22 years, she said. "I got used to it." She looked at him over her shoulder. "Coffee machine in the corner still works. The good pods are in the second drawer. Don't touch the ones on top. Those are Patricia's, and she will know." She walked out. Ashford stood alone in the break room for a long moment. Then, because he genuinely did not know what else to do, he found the second drawer, selected a coffee pod, and sat down to wait. His hands, he noticed, were not steady. At 6:22, Patricia Holloway cornered him. She came in with 2 mugs, set one in front of him without asking, and sat across from him with the directness of a woman who has absolutely no time for preamble. "You're not here about the dog," she said. "No," he admitted. "And you're not just here about the seal." "No." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Is she in danger?" He looked at Patricia Holloway, at the 27 years in her face, at the specific quality of someone who has spent 3 decades watching people fight to live and has developed a near religious sense of what matters and what doesn't, and decided she deserved the truth. "Potentially," he said. Patricia nodded slowly. "She saved that man's life tonight," she said. "The seal, Reyes. If she hadn't stepped up when she did, your dog would have kept the team away long enough that—" She paused. "She saved his life. She's been saving lives on this floor every day for 7 months, and she does it without drama, and without taking credit, and without asking for anything." She looked at him hard. "Whatever she is to you, to this building, she's ours. And I don't give up my people easily." Ashford held her gaze. "I'm not here to take her from you," he said. "I'm here because the people who tried to erase her may be about to try again." Patricia was quiet. Then she said, "What do you need?" He looked at her. "Right now, I need to know if you've noticed anything unusual in the last few weeks. Anyone asking about her. Anyone who didn't seem to belong." Patricia's eyes sharpened. She set down her mug. "3 days ago," she said slowly, "a man came to the admissions desk, said he was looking for a nurse who had worked at a clinic in Charlottesville, asked if we had any staff from that area." She paused. "I didn't think anything of it at the time." Ashford leaned forward. "He showed a badge," Patricia said. "I didn't get a good look. He left when I told him I couldn't share personnel records without authorization." She looked at Ashford. "I noticed the car he drove out in, a dark blue sedan, government plates. I noticed because he didn't look like any government official I've ever seen. He looked like someone doing a job they'd done before and didn't feel anything about." Ashford stood up. His coffee was half finished and he left it. "Which entrance did he use?" "Main lobby." He was already moving toward the door. He stopped, turned back. "Don't tell Ava about the car," he said. "Not yet." Patricia looked at him steadily. "Why?" "Because if she knows how close they already are, she'll run," he said. "And running alone is how she nearly died the first time." He walked out. Patricia sat alone in the break room for a long moment, both hands around her mug, thinking about a woman who moved like a ghost and whispered to military dogs, and had apparently once died and decided not to stay dead. Down the hall, Ava was taking a blood pressure reading on a 71-year-old man named Arthur, who was recovering from a cardiac event and liked to tell her about his grandchildren. She was listening. She was nodding. She was doing the things she had learned to do in this life, being present, being real, being the person she had chosen to become. But her hand, just once, moved to the pocket where she had put Ashford's document. She pressed it lightly, just to confirm it was still there. And then she went back to listening to Arthur talk about his granddaughter's soccer game, and she smiled at the right moments, and she was, to anyone watching, exactly what she appeared to be, exactly what she had worked so hard to become. Outside in the parking lot she couldn't see, A dark blue sedan sat 2 rows back from the main entrance. The engine was off. The driver had been there since 4:15 in the morning. He was patient. He had done this before. 7:02 a.m. Ava's shift ended on paper at 7. In practice, it ended at 7:14 because the patient in Bay 4 had a question about his discharge medication that his day nurse hadn't arrived to answer yet. And Ava was not the kind of person who walked away from an unanswered question when someone needed help. She answered it. She made sure he wrote it down. She checked his wristband one more time out of habit, not protocol. And then she walked to the locker room and sat on the bench for exactly 90 seconds with her eyes closed and her hands loose in her lap. She was not meditating. She was running calculations. Ashford was in the break room. The document was in her pocket, somewhere in a parking lot she hadn't looked at. There may or may not be a man in a government sedan who had been asking about her 3 days ago and whom she had not known about until 40 minutes ago. Because Patricia had told Ashford, and Ashford had told her anyway, despite what he'd said to Patricia, because Joel Ashford had never been as good at keeping things from her as he thought he was. And when she'd come back from Arthur's room, he had looked at her with the specific expression of someone carrying information they decided not to share. And she had simply waited, and within 6 minutes he'd told her everything. Some things didn't change. She opened her eyes, changed out of her scrubs, put on the clothes she'd worn in, dark jeans, gray hoodie, plain shoes, and looked at herself in the narrow mirror above the sink. The face that looked back was not the face of the person she used to be. It was older, quieter, softer in some places, and harder in others. And it had taken years to build this face, this life, this specific, ordinary existence. And she was not going to give it up without understanding exactly what she was being asked to give it up for. She pulled out the document, read it again, folded it, put it back. Then she went to find Ashford. He was standing now, not sitting, the coffee long finished, his body carrying the tension of a man who had been waiting and was no longer good at it. He looked up when she came in and his entire posture shifted, the way a compass needle shifts when north moves. "The man in the sedan," she said. "Do you know who sent him?" Ashford measured his words. "I have a reasonable idea. Voss. Or someone working for Voss's people. The contractor, his name is Gerald Fenn, he has a private security operation. Former military, former agency. People who do quiet work." Fenn, she repeated. The name was familiar in the way all old wounds are familiar. Not sharp anymore, but present, bone deep. He was in theater in '91. "He was the primary client on the operation," Ashford said. "The documentation your unit was sent to destroy, it was his. Records of payments to a dozen officials across 3 governments. If that material had survived and surfaced, Fenn would have faced federal prosecution and the collapse of every contract he held with the Defense Department." He paused. "Instead, the operation happened, the material was destroyed, and 6 people died. And Fenn built a $300 million security empire on the back of the contracts he kept." Ava stood very still. She had known pieces of this, had assembled the shape of it over years, in the quiet way you assemble things when the only tool you have is time and the particular clarity that comes from surviving something that was designed to kill you. But hearing it stated plainly, in a hospital break room, in the ordinary light of a Tuesday morning, was different. It had a weight that her private reconstructions had never fully captured. "And the journalist," she said, "you trust her?" "Her name is Claire Odom. She's been investigating Fenn's operation for 3 years. She's good, Ava. Careful. She's not going to burn a source or rush something to print before it's solid." He met her eyes. "She needs you. Not just your testimony. She needs the authentication record. The Ghost 7 mission logs that Voss had expunged. The copies were supposed to be destroyed, but one set was retained. By your unit." Something moved across Ava's face. "The field copies," she said slowly. "Sparrow, did you?" Don't call me that. Not harsh, just final. Did you keep them? He said. The field copies, the logs your unit kept independently of official records. Standard practice for ghost operations. The unit kept their own parallel documentation in case of command corruption. Did you keep yours? The silence lasted long enough that Ashford's breath became audible. Yes, she said. He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, they were bright in a way he seemed to want to control and couldn't entirely. Where? Safe, she said. Not here, not in Norfolk. Safe. Can you access them? I can access them. She looked at him directly. But I need you to understand something, Joel. If I surface, if I become a name in a published story, a living member of a unit that was declared dead, my life here is over. Everything I built, this floor, these patients, this name. She said it without self-pity, just fact, the way a surgeon describes a procedure. I need to know that what I'm trading it for is going to matter, that it's going to actually land on the people it should land on. Because I have been quiet for 22 years, and that silence has cost me things I will never get back. And I am not going to break it for a story that gets buried on page 12 and forgotten in a week. Ashford said, Fenn has a defense contract renewal coming up in 60 days, $1.4 billion. If Odom's story publishes with corroborating documentation and a living witness before that renewal is signed, the Congressional Review Board has already indicated, privately, that they would halt the process pending investigation. He looked at her. It won't get buried on page 12. She absorbed this. And Voss? Voss has maybe 3 months, maybe less. If this story publishes while he's still alive, he will be asked to testify. He's too sick to run. He's too scared to fight. Ashford's voice hardened slightly. He signed the order that sent your unit into that valley. He signed the report that erased you. The least he can do before he dies is say it out loud under oath. Ava was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I need to make a call. To who? She was already moving toward the door. Someone you don't know, she said. Give me 10 minutes. She did not give him 10 minutes. She gave him 4, because the call connected on the second ring and the conversation was short and precise and conducted in a tone that told Ashford, listening from across the room because she hadn't actually left, that whoever was on the other end of that call knew her well, trusted her completely, and was already moving before she'd finished speaking. When she hung up, she stood with the phone in her hand for one moment, her eyes focused on something that wasn't in the room. And then she turned around with a decision fully formed and visible in her posture. We need to move, she said. Not run, move. There's a difference. What happened in that call? The man in the sedan, she said. He's not alone. There's a second vehicle, arrived 40 minutes ago, parked on the north side of the building. She looked at Ashford steadily. They're not here to talk. Ashford's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. How do you know about the second vehicle? Because I called the one person in this city who knows my real history and watches my back whether I ask him to or not, she said. His name is Thomas Reeves. He's a retired MP who lives 3 blocks from this hospital and has a habit of walking his dog at 6 in the morning. He passed both vehicles on his walk. He called me at 6:40 to ask if I was expecting company. She paused. I told him no. He's been watching since then. Ashford stared at her. You have a former MP watching the hospital perimeter. I have a friend who worries about me, she said simply. Can you get your helicopter back? In 20 minutes, yes. Too long, she was already thinking. The documents, the field copies, they're in a storage unit in Chesapeake. 40 minutes by car. I need an hour. And I need someone with authority covering my exit from this building. Because if Fenn's people are watching the entrances and they see me leave, I can cover the exit, Ashford said. My uniform and rank alone will. Your uniform will tell them exactly who you are and confirm everything they're trying to verify, she said. The moment they see a Navy commander escorting a nurse out of this building at 7 in the morning, they know they've found the right person. He stopped. She was right. She was always right about this kind of thing, and the particular frustration on his face was the frustration of someone rediscovering a fact they had temporarily forgotten. Then how? The door opened. Patricia Holloway stood in the doorway with her coat on and her car keys in her hand, and an expression of absolute, immovable calm. "My car is in the basement parking level," she said. "The camera on level B2 has been broken for 6 weeks. Maintenance keeps saying they'll fix it." She held up the keys. "I've been driving this same car for 11 years. Nobody outside this hospital knows it. Nobody is watching it." She looked at Ava. "I heard the last part of that conversation. I wasn't trying to, but I heard it." Ava looked at her. "Patricia, don't," Patricia said, and her voice carried 27 years of not backing down. "You've been on my floor for 7 months. You've worked harder than nurses with 10 years experience. You stayed late for Arthur tonight when you didn't have to. And 6 hours ago, you walked up to a combat-trained military dog that had half the staff ready to run, and you made it stand down. And because of that, a 36-year-old man is alive in recovery right now." She paused. "I don't know everything about who you are or what you've done, but I know what kind of person you are. And I'm not going to stand here and watch the people who want to erase you make another attempt while I have car keys in my hand." The room was completely quiet. Ava looked at Patricia for a long moment, at this woman who had no stake in any of this beyond the simple, stubborn insistence of someone who has spent her entire life deciding that people matter, and then refusing to revise that position when it becomes inconvenient. She felt something shift in her chest. Not softness, exactly. Something more structural than that. Something closer to the feeling of being seen. "Thank you," Ava said, and she meant it in a way that couldn't be contained in 2 words, but she said them anyway because they were what she had. Patricia nodded once, briskly, because she was not the kind of person who lingered in emotional moments. "Let's go." 8:19 a.m. They took the stairwell to B2. Ashford stayed behind. His job was to stay visible, to be the thing the watchers in the parking lot focused on. The red herring in a Navy uniform who gave them something to track while the real movement happened below their line of sight. He didn't love this role. He stood in the main lobby with his hands behind his back and let himself be seen. And he kept his face neutral, and he did the thing he was best at, which was projecting authority so completely that it became a kind of camouflage. Patricia's car smelled like coffee and hand lotion and something floral that Ava couldn't name. It was an 11-year-old Volvo in a color that was either dark gray or dark blue, depending on the light. And it was exactly the kind of car that nobody notices, which was the best possible car to be in right now. Patricia drove without being told because she had already decided where they were going and had already calculated the route and was the kind of driver who doesn't need to talk to think. Ava sat in the passenger seat with the document in her lap and her phone in her hand, texting Thomas Reeves in short, efficient bursts. "North vehicle moving. Following?" she typed. Reeves came back in under a minute. "Negative. Still parked. South vehicle hasn't moved either. You're clear for now." She exhaled, typed, "Thank you. Go home. I mean it." His response was a single character, the letter N, which she had expected. "Who are we going to see?" Patricia asked. "A storage unit," Ava said. "Then a journalist." "The journalist? She's in the city?" "She will be." Ava was already dialing. The call connected after 2 rings. The voice on the other end was female, alert in the way of someone who had been awake for hours and was running on coffee in the particular electric focus of a story about to break wide open. "Claire Odom," the voice said. "My name is Ava Cole," Ava said. "Joel Ashford gave me your number 20 minutes ago. I'm a nurse at Norfolk General. I'm also the surviving member of a classified military unit that was declared dead in action in March of 1992. I have the original field documentation logs from Ghost Unit 7's final operation, and I'm prepared to go on record. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds, long enough to be real, short enough to confirm that this was someone who had been waiting for this call and knew immediately what it meant. "Where are you?" Odom asked. "Moving," Ava said. "I'll be at the documents in 40 minutes. I need you to tell me you have a secure location." "I have 3, Odom said. "Ava, the man you need to be most careful of right now is not Voss. It's Fenn. His people have been monitoring communications in the Norfolk area since yesterday morning. I flagged it last night, and I've been trying to reach Ashford since." "I know," Ava said. "They have 2 vehicles on my hospital. We've cleared them for now." "For now," Odom repeated, and her voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how temporary that kind of clearance was. "For now is enough," Ava said. "Send me the address of your most secure location. I'll be there by 10. She hung up. Patricia glanced at her sideways. "She sounds like she knows what she's doing." "She does." Ava looked at her phone. Odom's text came through almost immediately. An address in Virginia Beach, a private residence. She entered it into her mental map. "Patricia, you need to understand what you're involved in now. Tell me, the people watching that hospital, if they have any reason to believe you helped me leave, you become a person they want to talk to. These are not the kind of people who conduct interviews politely." Patricia's hands didn't move on the wheel. "I've been confronted by difficult people before. Not like these." "Maybe not," Patricia said evenly. "But I've also been in this city my entire life, and I know the chief of the Norfolk PD personally, and my brother-in-law is a federal judge, and I have documented the last 22 years of this hospital's operations in meticulous detail because I've always known that documentation is the only real protection any of us have." She glanced at Ava. "I'm not a soldier, I know that, but I'm not helpless." Ava looked at her, felt again that shift in her chest. "No," she said, "you're not." They drove in silence for a few minutes. The city moved past. Ordinary Tuesday morning, people commuting, coffee shops opening, the unremarkable forward motion of a world that doesn't know what's happening in a Volvo on Route 13 because the world never knows what's happening in the places where the real weight is being carried. "Can I ask you something?" Patricia said. "Yes. The code you said to the dog, what does it mean, the actual words?" Ava was quiet for a moment. "It's not exactly words," she said. "It's a sequence, part language, part sound pattern, part something that military canine trainers developed specifically for dogs trained in classified operations. The sequence is unique to each unit. It acts like a signature. The dog is trained to recognize it as coming from a trusted handler within its authorized unit." She paused. "Kodak recognized it because it's the same base architecture as the Ghost 7 sequence. The K9 training program has deep roots, some protocols carried forward." "So the dog heard something that sounded like home?" Patricia said. Ava looked at her. "Yes," she said quietly. "Something like that." Patricia nodded. Nothing more, but the understanding in it was complete. 9:07 a.m. The storage facility in Chesapeake was the kind of place that exists in every mid-sized city, the kind of anonymous, climate-controlled building where people put the things they can't throw away but can't keep visible. Ava had rented the unit 6 years ago under a name that was legally hers, one of 3 legal identities she maintained with the meticulous care of someone who has never fully stopped being the person she used to be, no matter how hard she tried. The unit was 12 by 8. Most of it was empty. Against the back wall, inside a sealed metal case with a combination lock that hadn't been touched in 4 years, was a waterproof bag. Inside the bag were 14 handwritten field logs, a series of photographs, 2 micro-cassette recordings in deteriorating but potentially still functional condition, and a sealed envelope that had been addressed to the Inspector General of the United States Army in 1994 and never sent, because in 1994, Ava had still been deciding whether she was willing to become visible again. She had decided no. For 22 years, she had decided no. She stood in front of the case now, the combination lock in her hands, and Patricia stood behind her, and for a moment, she just held it. The weight of 22 years of no, the weight of 6 names she recited like a prayer, the weight of a choice she had deferred and deferred until deference had become its own kind of answer. Marcus, Danny, Ray, Eddie, Sandra, Lewis. She entered the combination. The case opened. The documents were there, exactly where she had left them, and they were real, and they were enough, and she picked them up and felt the specific gravity of something that has been waiting a very long time to become what it was always meant to be. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady. She turned around. Patricia was watching her with the quiet attention of someone who understands that they are witnessing something private. "Okay," Ava said again. And this time it wasn't just an acknowledgement. It was a decision. A door opening. A woman who had spent 22 years being invisible deciding, in a storage unit in Chesapeake at 9 in the morning, that she was done. Not with her life here. Not with nursing. Not with Arthur and his grandchildren's soccer games. Not with the floor she had built herself into. But with the silence. With the weight of carrying something alone that should have been spoken aloud a long time ago, in a room with good lighting and a record running, by someone who had survived specifically so she could say it. She was done with that silence. Her phone rang. Ashford. She answered immediately. "What happened?" "The north vehicle moved," he said, and his voice had shifted into something clipped and operational, the voice she remembered from the field. "It's heading south. I think they made the Volvo on a traffic camera. Patricia's plate might be, how far behind us? 15 minutes, maybe 12. Ava was already moving back through the storage facility toward the exit. "Call Odom. Tell her we're coming in hot and we need the back entrance." "Already called. She said she's ready." A pause. "Ava." "I'm fine," she said. "I know you are," he said. "That's not what I was going to say." She pushed through the exit door into the morning air. Patricia right behind her, the documents pressed against her side. 12 minutes between her and whatever Fenn's people intended to do when they caught up with her. "Then what were you going to say?" she asked. His voice was quiet, steady. "I was going to say I'm sorry," he said, "for the report, for the signature, for the 22 years. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it to you directly before." He stopped himself. "Before whatever happens next." She was at the car. Patricia was already starting the engine. She stood with her hand on the door handle and looked up at the sky for 1 second. Clear, ordinary, Tuesday morning sky over Chesapeake, Virginia, and she breathed. "Drive to Odom's location," she said to Ashford. "If you're not there when I arrive, I'm going to be very unhappy with you." She heard the breath of something that was almost a laugh. "Yes, ma'am." She got in the car. Patricia pulled out before the door was fully closed. She didn't ask which way. She had the address. She drove. And behind them, somewhere on Route 13, a dark blue sedan carrying a man who had done this work before and felt nothing about it, pressed the accelerator down and closed the gap. Steady and patient, the way a person moves when they believe they are almost out of time. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. 9:23 a.m. Patricia drove the way she did everything, without wasted motion, without panic, with the focused efficiency of someone who has spent 30 years making fast decisions in high-pressure environments and has simply gotten very good at it. She didn't need to be told to check the mirror. She didn't need to be told to vary her speed. She had been a trauma nurse in an urban hospital for 27 years, and the particular skill set of someone who regularly managed multiple simultaneous crises had a way of transferring. Ava had the documents on her lap and her phone in her hand and one eye on the side mirror. The sedan was not visible yet. 12 minutes, Ashford had said, and they were 3 minutes into the drive, which meant they had a window, and the window was real, but it was not comfortable. Tell me about Odom's location, Patricia said. Private residence in Virginia Beach. She's been using it as a secure workspace for the last 6 months. It belongs to a retired federal prosecutor, someone she trusts. The address is not connected to her name in any public record. And Ashford? Driving separately, he should arrive around the same time we do. Ava glanced at the mirror again. Still clear. Patricia, when we get there, you can come in or you can drop me and go. I mean that. There's no obligation past this moment. Patricia's jaw set in a way that meant she had already made this decision and did not need to remake it. I drove this far, she said. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. She changed lanes with clean precision. You said these documents can put people in prison. If everything works the way it should, yes. Then I want to see them delivered, Patricia said simply. I'm not built for half measures. Ava looked at her for a moment. This woman who had materialized in a break room doorway with car keys and a spine made of something stronger than most people's best days, and felt that structural shift in her chest again. The one that wasn't sentiment exactly, but was adjacent to it. The one that felt like the first sign of trust returning after a very long absence. Her phone buzzed. Thomas Reeves, second vehicle is mobile, heading your direction. They've got your route somehow. Move faster. She read it aloud. Patricia's foot pressed the accelerator without a word. 9:31 a.m. Claire Odom was 38 years old, and she had the energy of someone who had been running on investigative adrenaline for so long that it had simply become her resting state. She met them at the side entrance of a brick colonial in a quiet residential block, and she was already talking before Ava was fully out of the car. I need to tell you something before we go inside, Odom said. Her voice was quick and precise. I got a call 20 minutes ago from my editor. Someone made contact with the publication, directly, not through channels, and applied pressure to delay the story. They cited national security concerns and invoked a provision that gives certain federal entities the ability to request a temporary hold on publication pending review. Ava stopped moving. A prior restraint request? A preliminary one. It's not binding yet, but if it formalizes in the next 48 hours, my editor's hands are tied until a judge rules on it. Odom looked at her steadily. Which means our window is not 60 days. It may be closer to 48 hours. The three women stood on the side path in the morning quiet of a residential Virginia Beach street, and the weight of that number, 48 hours, settled over all of them differently. For Odom, it was professional urgency. For Patricia, it was the gravity of realizing how serious this had just become. For Ava, it was something older and more familiar. The specific feeling of a timeline compressing, of the space between action and consequence shrinking to something that required absolute precision. Then we don't waste time, Ava said. She held up the waterproof bag. Let's go in. The interior of the house was orderly in the way of a workspace that someone cares about. A large table covered in organized files, 2 laptops, a digital recorder, a secure phone setup that Ava recognized as military-grade encryption. The retired prosecutor, a man named Howard Gill who was in his late 60s, white-haired and quiet-eyed, shook Ava's hand without preamble and said only, "Whatever you need. This is your room today." Ashford arrived 11 minutes later, slightly out of breath, with a specific look of a man who had pushed every speed limit between Norfolk and Virginia Beach and had no regrets about it. He took in the room in one sweep. Odom, Gill, Patricia, Ava with the documents already laid out on the table, and his shoulders dropped by about half an inch. Not relief exactly. The particular release of a tension that has been held so long it has become structural. He sat down across from Ava. She slid 3 documents toward him without being asked. He picked up the first one, read the first line, and went very still. "This is Marcus's handwriting," he said. "Yes," she said. He didn't say anything else. He kept reading. Odom moved fast. She had her recorder running, her laptop open, a legal pad in front of her, and the focused intensity of someone who has spent 3 years building toward a moment and knows with absolute clarity that this is it. She looked at Ava directly. Before we start, I want you to know your name, your current identity, your location, none of it goes into print without your explicit sign-off. What I need from you is testimony and documentation. The story can be told in a way that protects your present life. Ava looked at her. I know what I'm signing up for, she said. Don't protect me. Tell it whole. Odom blinked once. Are you sure? The people I'm doing this for didn't get the option of a protected identity, Ava said. 6 of them. Their names deserve to be in print. Their story deserves to be in print. And the people who made sure it wasn't, for 22 years, deserve to have a living person looking at them when that story runs. She held Odom's gaze. I'm sure. Odom nodded, set her pen to paper. Then let's start at the beginning. Ava started at the beginning. She had not spoken these words aloud to anyone in 22 years, and the first few sentences came out with a quality of controlled effort. Not emotion breaking through, but the specific labor of someone translating something that has lived in private language for so long that converting it to words other people can receive requires actual work. But she kept going. And after the first few minutes, the effort eased because the story itself had its own momentum, the way all true things do when they are finally given permission to move. She described the unit. She described the mission briefing, the intelligence they were given, the target location, the timeline. She described the operation itself, the execution, what they found when they reached the site, what the documentation actually contained, and the growing realization as the night went on that something was wrong about the intelligence, that the target was too convenient, that the parameters of the mission had been structured in a way that limited their exit options in ways that didn't make tactical sense unless the exit wasn't the point. And then she described the ambush. Ashford set down the document he was reading. He had gone very still. She described it plainly, without the kind of narrative drama that would have felt false. She described the vehicle fire. She described the 11 minutes she spent in a drainage channel 30 meters from the burning transport, listening to the sounds that she was not going to describe out loud. And then the silence that followed, and then the decisions she made in that silence, and then the 3 miles she crawled in the dark before she found a road. Odom was writing. Her hand hadn't stopped moving. Her face was composed, professionally focused, but her eyes were doing something that her professional face wasn't. They were carrying the weight of what they were hearing, the way a person carries weight when they have been looking for something for a long time and have just found it, and the finding is both necessary and terrible. Patricia sat in the corner. She had not said a word since they came inside. She was listening with the complete, still attention of someone who understands that this moment is not about her, that her role here is simply to be present, and that being present without interference is sometimes the most important thing a person can do. 10:44 a.m. Ava had been talking for over an hour when her phone buzzed. She picked it up. Thomas Reeves, 2 words. They're here. She looked up, looked at Ashford. They found the location. The room shifted. Not panic. Nobody in this room was built for panic, but the rapid, focused recalibration of people who have just been told that the window they were working inside has become significantly smaller. How? Odom asked sharply. Ashford's face had gone tight. My aide, he said, and his voice carried the specific quality of a man arriving at a conclusion he doesn't want but can't avoid. I told him I was coming here. I trusted him with the address. He paused. He's been in my unit for 2 years. I never had a reason to question. It doesn't matter right now, Ava said. Her voice was even. Thomas says they're here. How many? Her phone buzzed again. She read it. 2 vehicles, 4 people total. They're not approaching yet. They're covering the exits. Containing, Ashford said grimly, waiting for instruction. Waiting for authorization, Ava corrected. They're not going to move on a residential address in Virginia Beach in broad daylight without clearance from above. Which means we have a few minutes. She looked at Odom. What do you need to be able to publish without me? If I can't be here when this goes to print, what do you have right now, in this room, that makes the story stand on its own? Odom looked at the documents on the table, looked at her notes. The field logs authenticate the mission timeline and contradict the official record. The photographs corroborate the target location. The sealed IG letter establishes that you had knowledge of the corruption at the time and chose to document rather than destroy. She looked up. With your recorded testimony and the documents, I have everything. It's complete. Then the recording is the priority, Ava said. If something happens to me, the recording is what carries this forward. Where is it backed up? Live syncing to an encrypted server in... Don't tell me where, Ava said immediately. Don't tell anyone in this room who doesn't already know. If they get to us and start asking questions, nobody can give up an address they don't have. She looked around the room. Is the sync active right now? Yes, Odom said. Then everything I've said in the last hour is already off-site. Yes. Good. She turned to Ashford. Call your people, not your aide, someone you trust above your aide. You need a federal presence here in the next 10 minutes. Ashford already had his phone out. I'm calling the deputy JAG. She owes me 3 favors and she does not play around. He was dialing. She can have a federal marshal here faster than Fenn's people can decide to move. Do it, Ava turned to Gil. Howard, is there a room in this house that locks from the inside with something more substantial than a standard interior door lock? Gil looked at her with the calm of a man who spent 40 years in federal law and had seen most things. Study, steel core door, deadbolt. He paused. And I have a gun safe in there that I'm going to open right now. Ava looked at him. Thank you, young lady, Gil said, standing with the deliberate ease of a man who is older but not slower. I prosecuted 2 sitting senators and a deputy defense secretary during my career. I am not intimidated by private security contractors. He paused at the doorway. I'll be right back. Patricia stood up from her corner. She walked to Ava and stood in front of her. And for a moment, she just looked at her. The same way she'd looked at her in the supply room at 3 in the morning, reading something below the surface. Then she said, when this is over, whatever version of over this becomes, you still have a floor to come back to. Ava's jaw tightened for exactly 1 moment. Patricia. Don't argue with me, Patricia said, with the same tone she used when residents tried to override her clinical judgment. You have a floor. You have patience. You have Arthur, who will not stop asking where you are. She held Ava's gaze. Don't let this be the thing that takes that from you. Fight for both. You're allowed to fight for both. Ava looked at her for a long beat. Then she nodded. Once. The way people nod when a thing has settled into place that they needed to hear, but hadn't found the words for themselves. Ashford came back into the room. Deputy JAG is mobilizing. She's sending 2 federal marshals, and she's filing an emergency motion to block the prior restraint request simultaneously. She says, he looked at his phone. She says, and I quote, tell whoever pulled that stunt they picked the wrong week. Something that was almost a smile moved across Ava's face. Good. Her phone buzzed again. Thomas. One of them is moving toward the side entrance. The one you came in through. He's alone. Looks like he's testing. She read it aloud. Ashford moved instinctively toward the door. She put her hand out, not touching him, just placing herself in his line of motion. No, she said. Let him test. If he finds a locked door and no response, he goes back to the others. If you go out there, it escalates. Ashford stopped. He looked at her hand, not touching his arm, but positioned exactly where it needed to be to communicate what it needed to communicate, and he stayed put. 40 seconds. 50. A full minute. Her phone buzzed. He went back. She exhaled. They're not going to breach a private residence in daylight on a residential street with no authorization, she said again, as much to the room as to herself. They're disciplined. Fenn trained them to be, which means they're waiting for a call that authorizes action. She looked at Ashford. How long until your marshals arrive? 7 minutes. Then we have 7 minutes. She turned back to Odom. We're not done with the testimony. Keep recording. Odom stared at her. You want to keep 7 minutes, Ava said. I'm not going to sit here in silence. Let's use the time. And so they did. Ava sat down, and Odom's recorder kept running, and Ava picked up the thread of the story exactly where she'd left it and continued, her voice steady and unhurried, while 4 trained operatives waited in vehicles outside, and federal marshals closed the distance on a Tuesday morning, and the waterproof bag with 14 handwritten field logs sat on a table in Virginia Beach and waited to become the thing it had always been meant to be. 11:09 a.m. The federal marshals arrived in 9 minutes, not 7, and they arrived with the specific energy of people who have been briefed on the situation by someone with high authority and strong opinions and are treating it accordingly. 2 of them, a woman named Chen and a man named Briggs, both in their 40s, both carrying the kind of professional stillness that operates at a register just below intimidating and lands squarely on authoritative. Chen introduced herself to Ava with a directness that Ava appreciated. We're aware of the vehicles outside. We've already called for local PD backup as a secondary presence. The men outside know we're here now. They're not going to move. She looked at the table, at the documents, at Odom's recorder. Are you in the middle of something? We're finishing something, Ava said. Chen nodded. Take the time you need. We're not going anywhere. The call came at 11:27, not to Ava's phone, to Ashford's. He answered it, listened for 18 seconds without speaking, and then said 3 words. I understand, sir. In a voice that carried something Ava had almost never heard in him. Not quite shock. The thing that comes just before shock, when the information has landed, but the emotional processing hasn't caught up. He lowered the phone. Everyone in the room was watching him. That was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, he said. He's been briefed on the situation. He's authorizing a full declassification review of the Ghost 7 mission files. Not in 60 days, not pending investigation, immediately. He paused. He also said to tell you, he looked at Ava, and something in his face was different now. Stripped of the last layer of professional composure, he said to tell you that the Congressional Oversight Committee has been aware of the Fenn situation for 6 months and has been waiting for documentation they could act on. He stopped. He said Ghost 7 deserved better. The room was quiet. Ava sat with that for a moment. 6 names moved through her mind like they always did. Marcus, Danny, Ray, Eddie, Sandra, Lewis. She let them move, didn't push them away, didn't hold them so tight they couldn't settle. Just let them pass through, the way grief passes when you've made enough room for it. Yes, she said. They did. Outside, the 2 vehicles began to move. Marshal Chen confirmed it from the front room. Fenn's people, pulling away without confrontation, without engagement, the tactical withdrawal of people who had received their own call and been told the situation had changed and it was time to be elsewhere. The specific retreat of men who understand that the moment they were sent to prevent had already happened. Odom saved her recording, closed her laptop, looked at the documents. Then she looked at Ava with the expression of someone who has been given something enormous and knows exactly what the responsibility of carrying it means. This story runs in 72 hours, she said. Front page, above the fold, digital and print. Gerald Fenn, Harlan Voss, the falsified intelligence, the ambush, all of it. She paused. And Ghost Unit 7. All 7 names. All 7 names, Ava confirmed. Odom extended her hand. Ava shook it. Ashford had moved to the window. He stood with his back to the room, looking out at the ordinary residential street where nothing visible had changed, where the grass was still the same grass, and the houses still the same houses, and the Tuesday morning was still proceeding in its unremarkable way, as if the last 3 hours had not happened. His shoulders were carrying something. She knew what it was. She had been carrying a version of it for 22 years. She walked to him, stood beside him. He didn't turn. "I've been thinking about what I should have done differently," he said, "for a long time. 22 years of a very specific kind of thinking." "I know," she said. "I don't know if this fixes it." "It doesn't fix it," she said. "Fixing it would mean 6 people coming back. That's not on the table." She paused. "But there's a difference between fixing and honoring. This is the second one." He turned to look at her. His face was the face of a man in his 50s who had carried something heavy for a long time and had just, for the first time, felt it begin to shift. Not disappear, begin to shift. The particular quality of a burden that isn't gone, but is no longer only yours. "I'm sorry," he said again. The same words as before, but different now. Not the urgent, overdue words of someone who needed to say them before things escalated. The quieter, more settled words of someone who has said them in the right moment and meant them down to the bone. "I know you are," she said. Patricia appeared at her elbow, quietly, as Patricia did everything when the moment called for quiet. She held out a bottle of water. "For both of you," she said. "Drink something. You've both been running on adrenaline for 4 hours, and you're going to crash if you don't put something in your body." Ava took the water. She drank. The ordinary physical act of it, cold water, the specific simplicity of being a body that needs hydration, landed differently than it usually did. More present, more real. The way ordinary things become vivid after something has tested you. "I need to call the hospital," Patricia said, already pulling out her phone. "Cover my shift. Let them know I'm delayed." She looked at Ava with a slight lift of her eyebrow. "And then I need to let Arthur know his nurse is fine, because I guarantee he's asked about you twice already." Ava felt something loosen in her chest. Not a dramatic loosening, a quiet one. The specific release of someone who has been holding themselves in a posture of readiness for a very long time and has just been given, by the most ordinary possible statement about a 71-year-old man and his questions, permission to stand down. She was not done. There would be more. Interviews, verification processes, the specific chaos of a story this size moving through the machinery of publication. The response from Fenn's lawyers, the congressional proceedings, whatever Voss did in his last months when the story hit, whatever shape her life took after the name Ava Cole appeared in a national publication above words that described who she had been before that name existed. She was not done, but she had done the central thing, the thing that could not be undone now. She pulled out her phone, found Thomas Reeves's number, typed, "We're clear. Thank you. Go home now. I mean it this time." His response came back in under 30 seconds. A single word. "Finally." She almost laughed. Almost. She put the phone in her pocket, and she stood in a house in Virginia Beach with a Navy commander and a trauma nurse and a journalist and a retired federal prosecutor and 2 federal marshals. And outside there was a Tuesday in March that was going to continue being a Tuesday in March, regardless of everything. And she breathed, and she let herself be exactly where she was, exactly who she had chosen to be, carrying everything she carried without apology and without the exhausting, daily effort of hiding the fact that she was carrying it. The documents were off the table now. Odom had them. The recording was already somewhere she didn't know about, safe behind encryption that even the people outside couldn't touch. 22 years, 6 names, 1 sealed envelope that had waited long enough. Done. Her phone buzzed one more time. She expected Thomas. She expected Ashford's aide, perhaps, with another update. She did not expect the number that appeared on the screen. a number she didn't recognize, with a naval hospital prefix that she did. She answered it. "Is this Ava Cole?" The voice was male. Young, slightly rough in the specific way of someone who has recently been through surgery and is on the good end of the recovery but hasn't fully arrived yet. "Yes," she said slowly. "This is Daniel Reyes," the voice said. "Chief Petty Officer, Norfolk General." A pause. "I'm told you're the nurse who got Kodak to stand down last night." Ava was very still. "I am. I'm also told you did a few other things this morning that I don't fully have the picture on," Reyes said. "But Kodak has been sitting outside my recovery room for the last 2 hours, and every time a nurse comes in, he turns his head and looks at the door like he's waiting for someone specific." Another pause. "I think he's waiting for you." Ava didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at the floor. She pressed her lips together once. "Tell him I'll come by," she said. "Later today." "He'll be glad to hear it," Reyes said, and then quieter. "I don't know exactly what you did, but whoever you are, thank you." She held the phone after the call ended, looking at nothing, feeling the specific, rare weight of a day that has asked everything of you and given something real in return. Something that wasn't resolution, wasn't closure, wasn't the clean end that stories are supposed to have, but something true, something that had happened and could not be unhappened, which was all that truth ever really was. She put the phone in her pocket, looked up. Patricia was watching her, the way Patricia always watched her, reading everything, assuming nothing, prepared to respond to whatever came next. "Ready?" Patricia asked. Ava thought about the floor she'd walk back to every day for 7 months, about Arthur's granddaughter's soccer game, about the specific rhythm of a 12-hour shift, the particular intimacy of helping someone through the worst day of their life, the quiet authority of knowing exactly what to do when someone's body is failing, and every second is a decision. About a dog sitting outside a recovery room, turning his head toward every door. About 6 names she had carried alone for 22 years that were about to become, finally, undeniably, publicly real. "Yes," she said, and she meant it in more ways than one. 1:14 p.m. Patricia drove back to Norfolk with the quiet confidence of someone who has done something she will never regret. She didn't talk much on the drive, and Ava didn't need her to. The silence between them had become the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The specific silence of 2 people who have been through something real together and have arrived, together, on the other side of it. Not unscathed, but intact. Ava sat with her hands loose in her lap and watched the city come back into view and let herself feel, for the first time in several hours, the full weight of what the morning had been. Not the operational weight, the moving, the documents, the marshals, the calls, the tactical calculation of staying 1 step ahead. The other weight, the human weight, the 22 years of weight that had shifted this morning in a way that was not dramatic and was not clean, but was real and irreversible and necessary. She thought about Marcus Reyes, not Daniel Reyes in the recovery room, Marcus, her unit, the man who had the most careful handwriting she had ever seen on a person who could also disassemble a weapon in under 40 seconds. He had kept his field logs in a precise, unhurried hand, every letter formed like he was writing something that mattered, because he believed she had heard him say it once, just once, in the desert, quietly, that the record of what they did was the only thing that would outlast them. He had been right. He had just not lived to see it. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. One moment. Then she put her hands back in her lap. "You okay?" Patricia asked. "I will be," Ava said. It was an honest answer, which was the only kind she was still capable of giving today. They reached the hospital at 1:41. Patricia pulled into her parking spot in B2, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. "I need to go check on my floor," she said. "Day shift has been without me for 6 hours, And there are at least 2 situations up there that I can feel in my bones from here. Ava almost smiled. Go. You're going to see the dog. Yes. Good. Patricia got out of the car, then paused, door half open, and looked back. Ava, what you did this morning, the documents, the testimony, all of it, that took something that most people don't have. Ava looked at her. Most people haven't spent 22 years building up to it. That's not what I mean, Patricia said. I mean the courage to stop protecting yourself and start protecting something larger. That's not common. She paused. I just wanted you to know I saw it. She closed the door and walked away. And Ava sat alone in the car for exactly 30 seconds. And she let Patricia's words land without deflecting them, which was something she was still learning to do. Accepting acknowledgement without immediately converting it into something smaller and easier to carry. Then she got out and went to find Kodak. 2:03 p.m. The recovery wing of the surgical floor was quieter than the ER, lower lit, with a different rhythm. Not the urgent percussion of trauma, but the slower, more patient tempo of healing. Ava walked the hallway with the ease of someone who knows hospitals the way other people know their own houses, reading the monitors and the body language of the staff in her peripheral vision without meaning to, the professional reflex that never fully turned off. She heard Kodak before she saw him. Not a growl, a low sound, a single note of attention, the specific frequency of an animal that has registered someone familiar before the visual confirmation has arrived. She turned the corner and he was there, 80 pounds of Belgian Malinois sitting outside a closed recovery room door with the patient posture of something that has decided it is staying and is not negotiating about it. He saw her. His ears moved. His tail, which had not moved since he'd entered this hospital 14 hours ago, moved once. Deliberately. The way a flag moves in a wind that has just changed direction. She walked to him, crouched down. He leaned his head forward and pressed his forehead against hers, and she put her hand on the side of his jaw, and for a moment they were just 2 creatures that had been through a long night and a longer morning, and were right now in this fluorescent-lit hospital hallway, simply glad to have each other close. Good boy, she said quietly. You did good. He sighed. A long, deep, full-body sigh that sounded like 24 hours of tension leaving all at once. She straightened, knocked on the recovery room door. Come in, said the rough, slightly raspy voice of a man who had been through surgery 12 hours ago and was already sounding like he was annoyed about having to lie still. Daniel Reyes was 36 years old and looked, even in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and a surgical dressing on his shoulder, like someone who was already calculating how quickly he could be back in the field. He had dark eyes that tracked her with the careful, assessing quality of someone trained to evaluate threats and allies simultaneously on first contact. He looked at Ava for a long moment before he spoke. You're smaller than I expected, he said. Most people are smaller than what they're afraid of, she said. He paused. Then something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but the first degree of movement toward one. Fair enough, he shifted against the pillow, winced without making a sound about it. Sit down. You look like you've been awake for 14 hours. 12, she said. She sat. Corporal Tate filled me in on the basics. What you did last night. He looked at her directly. What you said to Kodak. It worked, she said simply. Yeah, it did. He was quiet for a moment. Tate also told me, not in so many words, but enough words, that you were involved in something this morning that was above his pay grade, and that Commander Ashford flew in from D.C. on a helicopter. He held her gaze. I don't need the details, but I want to know if you're all right. The question landed differently than she expected, not because it was a surprising question, but because of who was asking it. A man who had been in surgery until 5 in the morning, who had tubes in his arm and stitches in 2 places, who was doing the asking, not the receiving. She had spent a long time in a world where people asked that question as transaction, as intelligence gathering, as performance. Reyes asked it the way soldiers ask it in the field, when they genuinely need to know, because the person next to them matters. "I'm all right," she said. "Things happened today that needed to happen. I'm still processing the shape of them." He nodded. "That's a real answer," he said. "I appreciate that. You asked a real question." He looked at the door, behind which Kodak was presumably still sitting. "He's been like that since they brought me out of recovery," Reyes said. "Won't move. Staff tried to take him to the military working dog liaison 3 times. Wouldn't go. They gave up." He paused. "He recognized you, didn't he? Not just the code. He recognized you specifically." Ava considered how much to say. Then she said, "Military K-9 training has deep institutional roots. Some programs and protocols carry forward across units. Kodak responded to the code because the architecture was familiar, but the way he responded," she paused, "the code tells the dog it's safe. The dog's instinct tells it who to trust. Those are 2 different things." Reyes was quiet, thinking. "You were in a unit," he said, not a question. "A long time ago," she said. "Ghost here?" She looked at him. He met her gaze without flinching. The look of someone asking because they understand what the category means, not out of casual curiosity, but out of the specific respect one tier-level operator extends to another. "Yes," she said. He absorbed this. "And now you're a nurse." "Now I'm a nurse," she said. "That's not a smaller thing." "No," he said immediately. "No, it's not." And he meant it, in the way people mean things when they've had their life saved twice in one night, once by a surgical team and once by the person who made it possible to reach the surgical team. Ava stood. "I need to get some sleep. My next shift is at 11 tonight." Reyes looked at her. "You're going back on the floor tonight." "I have patients," she said, "including a 71-year-old in cardiac recovery who's going to have questions about his discharge medication and whose day nurse may or may not have remembered to—" "Arthur," said a voice from the doorway. She turned. Patricia was standing there in her charge nurse face, arms crossed, the expression of someone who has just spent 2 hours managing a floor that ran short-staffed and has opinions about it. "Arthur has asked about you 4 times. The day nurse is fine, and Arthur's discharge medication has been handled, but he wants to hear it from you specifically, so you're going to need to stop by his room before you go home." Ava looked at her. "You just got back to the floor." "And already dispatched," Patricia said without a trace of complaint. Ava turned back to Reyes. "Rest," she said. "You're going to try to talk someone into letting you out of here early. Don't." "I wasn't." "You were," she said. He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She walked to the door, stopped, turned back once. "What you and your unit do, the work, the cost of it, I know what that is, and I know what it asks of the people who do it." She held his gaze. "Thank you for your service isn't the right phrase. It never is. But I see what you carry. I want you to know someone sees it." Reyes was quiet for a moment. His jaw moved. He looked away from her, at the wall, in the specific way of men who have been trained not to show what they feel and are, in this moment, losing that particular battle. Then he looked back. "Likewise," he said. His voice was rougher than it had been. "Whoever you were before this, whatever you did, likewise." She walked out. 4:17 p.m. She stopped by Arthur's room on the way out, as instructed. He was sitting up in bed with the remote control in one hand and the expression of a man who has been awake since 6 and has had enough of lying still. He lit up the moment she walked in with the uncomplicated, genuine delight of someone who simply likes the person they're looking at and makes no secret of it. "There she is," he said. "I heard all kinds of commotion last night. Dog in the ER, somebody said." "Military working dog," she said. "His handler was a patient. Is the handler okay?" "He's going to be fine," Arthur nodded with the satisfied gravity of a man who has decided that the correct outcome has occurred and can now return to his other concerns. Now, about this discharge medication. The day nurse told me something about the timing, but I want to hear it from you, because I don't always... Write it down while I tell you, she said, pulling a notepad from the bedside table and pressing it into his hand. That way you don't have to remember it, you just have to read it. He took the notepad. Smart, he said, with the tone of someone discovering a principle they should have applied earlier in life. She told him. He wrote it down. She checked that he'd written it correctly, adjusted 2 words, and handed it back. He read it over, nodded once, and then looked up at her with the particular focus of an older person who has been paying attention to something that hasn't been said. You look tired, he said. Not regular tired, the other kind. The other kind, she agreed. Anything you want to talk about? She looked at him, this 71-year-old man with his grandchildren's soccer schedules and his discharge notes and his uncomplicated direct kindness, and she felt with a clarity that surprised her how much this had come to matter to her. Not as a cover story, not as a constructed identity, as a real thing. A real floor, real patience, real work that connected her to the forward-moving, continuing, ordinary humanity of people getting better and going home. Not right now, she said, but ask me again sometime. He nodded like that was a reasonable answer. Get some sleep, he said. You're back tonight? 11, she said. I'll be asleep by then, he said, but I'll know you're out there. She left his room and stood in the corridor for a moment, alone, and she breathed the specific air of a floor she had worked for 7 months, antiseptic and hand sanitizer, and something beneath those things that was warmer, harder to name, the atmospheric residue of hundreds of people who had lain in these beds at their most vulnerable and had been helped and had recovered and had gone home. She was part of that. She had chosen to be part of that. And no story that ran in any publication, no matter how big, no matter how necessary, was going to take that from her. She would not allow it. 7:52 p.m. She was home, the small apartment 3 miles from the hospital that she had furnished gradually over 7 months with the unhurried care of someone who intended to stay, when Ashford called. She answered it on the second ring. Tell me, Gerald Fenn's attorneys filed an injunction against Odom's publication at 4:30 this afternoon, Ashford said. The federal judge assigned to the case denied it at 6:15. Took her less than 2 hours. A pause. She wrote in her ruling that the public interest was, quote, overwhelming, and that the documentary evidence was credible and substantial. She denied the injunction in its entirety. Ava sat down on the edge of her bed. And Voss? Voss was contacted by a congressional staffer at 5 o'clock this afternoon. He was informed that his testimony before a closed session subcommittee is being requested within 30 days. Ashford's voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath it. His attorney called back 40 minutes later and said Voss would cooperate. She absorbed this. He's going to cooperate. His attorney said he wants to make a statement, Ashford said, on record, before he stopped, started again, before he runs out of time. She closed her eyes. She thought, not for the first time, about what it meant to reach the end of your life with the weight of a decision like that still on your chest. She did not feel sympathy for Voss. She did not feel triumph either. She felt the specific, complicated gravity of justice that arrives too late to save the people it was meant for, but arrives nonetheless, and has to be enough. Okay, she said. Odom's story publishes tomorrow morning, Ashford said. Front page, digital goes live at 6 a.m., print editions by 8. He paused. She sent me a preview of the headline. What is it? He read it. 7 words and a colon. The names of Ghost Unit 7, all 6 of them, followed by 2 words that had not been attached to those names in 22 years. Finally acknowledged. Ava pressed her free hand against her mouth for a moment. One moment, then she moved it away. Her eyes were dry because she had learned a long time ago to carry grief in a part of herself where it didn't leak out at inconvenient times. But the pressure behind them was real, and she let it be there without apologizing for it. "Good," she said, her voice held. "There's one more thing," Ashford said. His tone shifted, not into something heavy, but into something careful, the tone of someone delivering news that is neither bad nor simple. "The Deputy Secretary's office called me an hour ago. There's going to be a formal military review of the Ghost 7 mission. A posthumous honors process for the 6 members of the unit." He paused. "And a recommendation, not a requirement, your choice entirely, that the surviving member of the unit be considered for formal reinstatement of her military record. Her real record, under her real name." Ava was quiet for a long time. Her real name, the name she had buried under 3 miles of Kuwaiti desert, and a life she had built by hand from nothing. The name that appeared in a death declaration signed by a man who was now cooperating with a congressional subcommittee. The name that appeared on 14 field logs in a waterproof bag that was now in the hands of a journalist who was going to put it in a newspaper that would be read tomorrow morning by people who had never heard it and people who would recognize it immediately. Her real name. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking," Ashford said. "That's all any of us are asking." A pause. "Ava, what you did today, the documents, the testimony, the way you handled everything, the way you always handle everything." His voice had the particular quality of someone who has reached the bottom of a long accounting and found that what they owe is more than they can pay, but are going to spend the rest of their life trying. "I don't have a word large enough for what I want to say." "Joel," she said. "Yeah." "You found one this morning," she said. "In the break room. It was enough." He was quiet. "Get some sleep," she said. "You've been awake since before me." "I'll try," he said. "You're back on shift tonight?" 11. "Of course you are," he said. And this time the thing in his voice was unmistakably the thing she had almost heard in the break room and hadn't let herself name. Pride. The specific, clean, unambiguous pride of someone who has known a person at their most extraordinary and watched them choose, again and again, to be extraordinary in ways that nobody requires of them. She ended the call, sat in her apartment in the specific quiet of a Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet that exists everywhere in the city when most people are finishing their dinners and watching their television and moving through the unremarkable goodness of ordinary life, unaware that somewhere nearby a story has been set in motion that will be on their screens tomorrow morning. She thought about Marcus in his careful handwriting. She thought about Danny, who had been the best navigator she had ever worked with and who made terrible jokes at exactly the right moment to keep everyone from losing their nerve. She thought about Ray, who had carried a photograph of his mother in his left chest pocket because he said it kept the important things between him and his heart. She thought about Eddie and Sandra and Louis, and she let herself think about them fully, without the protective shorthand she usually applied. Not just the names, not just the images, but the full, specific, irreplaceable reality of who each of them had been. She let herself feel the loss of them completely, without managing it, without the 22 years of practice containment. It lasted about 4 minutes, and it was not okay, and it was not resolved, and it was not something that tomorrow's newspaper was going to fix. But it was real, and she let it be real, and then she breathed, and she stood up. She made dinner. She ate it. She changed into her uniform. She put her badge on. At 10:47, she walked back into Norfolk General to the main entrance, the same entrance she had walked into hundreds of times, and the overnight receptionist, a young man named Derek who always had earbuds in and always pulled them out when she came through, pulled them out now and said, "Hey Ava, you hear about the military dog thing last night? My buddy sent me the story. Somebody tweeted about it." "I heard," she said, and smiled at him, and walked on. 10:58 p.m. Patricia was at the nurse's station doing handoff with the evening charge nurse when Ava arrived, which meant Patricia had stayed 2 hours past the end of her shift, which was not surprising, and which told Ava, without a word being exchanged, that Patricia had spent those 2 hours making sure the floor was solid before leaving it in other hands. The evening charge nurse looked tired and slightly overwhelmed. Patricia looked like she had resolved 3 situations and was considering a 4th. She saw Ava, handed the clipboard to the evening nurse, said, "She'll cover Arthur in bays 2 through 6. Then, to Ava, "Arthur's asleep. His vitals are good. Bay 3 has a new admit, 64, post-op. Ask her about her pain level every 40 minutes because she'll say she's fine whether she is or not. Bay 5 is stable, but watch his fluid balance." "Got it," Ava said. "Anne," Patricia said, and her voice changed registers slightly, not to something dramatic but to something real, beneath the professional surface. "Kodak is still in the hall by the recovery wing. The night staff tried to move him to the liaison facility again. He went about 30 feet and then sat down and wouldn't move further." She looked at Ava with a slight lift in her brow. "I told them to leave him." "Good," Ava said. Patricia picked up her bag, looked at Ava for a moment, the direct, reading look that saw everything. Then she said simply, "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow," Ava said. Patricia walked out. Ava stood at the nurse's station and picked up the first chart. Bay 3, post-op, 64. She read the notes, committed the relevant numbers to memory, and started down the hall with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and why it matters. She passed the recovery wing. Kodak turned his head at her approach, ears forward, tail moving once. She stopped for 3 seconds, put her hand on the side of his jaw briefly. He leaned in. "You can go home soon," she said quietly. "He's okay." He looked at her with the clear, uncomplicated eyes of an animal that trusts without condition or history, and she moved on. She knocked on Bay 3's door. A woman's voice, careful and slightly guarded in the way of people who don't want to admit to pain. "Come in." Ava came in, introduced herself, asked the question. The woman said she was fine. Ava looked at her and said, gently but without preamble, "I need you to give me an honest number on a scale of 1 to 10, because fine isn't a number, and your recovery depends on us managing this correctly." The woman looked slightly startled. Then she said, 6. Ava nodded and said, "Thank you. Let's do something about that." The night proceeded, bay by bay, patient by patient, vital by vital. The particular, ongoing human work of a floor that does not stop because the world outside it has had a significant day. At 2 in the morning, Arthur briefly woke and said her name in the dark, half asleep, confirming something. She said, "I'm here, you're fine, go back to sleep." And he did. At 3:15, a new trauma came in through the ER, and the building sharpened for 40 minutes and then settled. At 4 o'clock, she sat at the nurse's station and entered chart notes in the low, fluorescent quiet and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she had spent years developing and remained grateful for. At 6:17 in the morning, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She took it out, a news alert, national publication. The story was live. She read the headline, the same 7 words in a colon that Ashford had read to her last night. 6 names, 2 words that had not been connected to those names in 22 years. She read the first paragraph, carefully, objectively written, exactly the kind of meticulous and serious journalism she had trusted Odom to produce. She put the phone back in her pocket, breathed once, and went back to work. Not because work was a distraction, not because she was running from the weight of what had just published and what it meant and what it was going to set in motion. She went back to work because the work was real, because the people on this floor were real, because every day that she came through those doors and did this particular thing was a day she had claimed from a story that had tried to end her, and she intended to keep claiming it. This was her answer to everything that had been done to her and to her people. Not a press statement, not a ceremony, not the particular theater of public acknowledgement. though she would stand in it when it was required of her, and she would say the names out loud, and she would let the record show that she survived, that they were real, that it happened. But her answer, the one she lived in, was this floor, these patients, this name she had chosen, this life she had built without permission or protection or any guarantee except her own decision to build it. She was a nurse in Norfolk, Virginia, who had once been a ghost and had chosen, at 30 years old in a drainage channel in the Kuwaiti desert, to come back from that and become something else. Something quieter and harder and more stubborn. Something that could not be expunged from the record because the record was written every day in the small, essential, undramatic acts of being present for people at their worst. That was Ava Cole. That was who she had decided to be. And 22 years in, with 6 names finally in print, and a 22-year silence finally broken, and a dog down the hall still keeping watch, she was still deciding it. Every shift, every patient, every morning she came through those doors and put her badge on and said, without words, that she was here, she had survived, and she was not finished. That was the whole story. That was enough.